Okay, hi, my name is Ezequiel. You all know me well. So today I'm going to be talking about my project, which is called Affirmative Education. The focus of my project is the idea of diversifying resources and access, specifically for Latinx students in secondary education. So as a brief note, I'm going to be using the term Latinx in this presentation. All that means is Latino. It's just the preferred academic term for gender neutrality. So as a brief overview, I'm going to be talking about the problems that led me to this project, then the vision that I ultimately had in creating this project, so that we can segue into some successes that I've had, and then moving forward what we can do as a community to try and keep this as something that's sustainable in the future. So the first thing that I want to talk about is how this project came to be. I work as an ESL tutor in Pike Township, so I'm coming into contact with a lot of students that don't speak English as their first language. And a lot of stories stand out to me, but the story that I remember most is this kid named Alejandro. And Alejandro has not been able to read because he came to the United States from Mexico as of, I think, 2 years ago. And so I try to read books with him to get him interested in reading and try to get him to understand the language and be integrated in the school system. And so we're reading one of those books that has the same protagonist as all the books that we read. Some boy named Dick and his dog named Spot. And as we're reading it, he stops and he says, "Mr. Gonzalez, I have a question for you." And I said, "Sure, what's up?" And he said, "Why do none of the kids in these books look like me?" And what do I say, you know? And I kind of sit there and I'm like, well, we have those books, it just isn't one of them. He's like, okay, I understand. So we keep reading, and he stops and he says, "Mr. Gonzalez, I have another question for you." And I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And I'm kind of apprehensive at this point. And he said, "I get that they can't look like me, but can they at least have names that are easier to pronounce?" And it's kind of funny, seeing the world through a little kid's eyes, but at the same time it points to the bigger problem, that we don't have representation in the school system for these students, and they're going to go their entire lives without seeing themselves represented in a book, without seeing themselves represented in curriculum. So then I decided to use this as my project, the idea of diversifying resources so that students like Alejandro can see themselves and they can progress through their life without feeling ignored. So in doing research, I found a lot of interesting things working on my project. The first is that Latinx has paid $124 billion in household taxes in 2013, which is a lot of money. Moving on, Latinxes make up about 93,902 residents in Marion County, and they're the largest growing ethnic population. That's according to Pew Research and also Census.gov. But what surprised me is that according to the Department of Education, less than 1% of approved Indiana courses deal with Latinx issues specifically. This can be ethnic studies, this can be Latin American history, whatever you want to call it. That's 3 courses out of more than 460 courses. And I see that there's a problem with that. Latinxes make up a large amount of taxpayers, so they should be represented in the institutions that they're funding, public institutions. Moreover, pro-Latinx education has worked. There's a study that was done in California where they implemented pro-Latinx education, which is creating courses like ethnic studies, creating courses like Latin American history. And the dropout rate halved. It went from 34% to 14%. That's around 1 million dropouts to just 420,000 dropouts. There's also other studies by researchers like Hurtado and Alvarado that show that if you implement diverse resources, self-reported student validation goes up. That means students feel represented and they start liking the education that they're being a part of. But I saw that the problem went further than that. This is the percent of Latinx students that are enrolled in Indiana public schools. It's about 100,000 students. So you'd think that the teacher population would be kind of similar, pretty close, but that's not what the reality shows. Only about 1% of Latinx teachers are employed in Indiana public schools. If you want a point of reference, in Ben Davis, which is one of the largest schools in the state, we have 1, maybe 2 Latinx teachers. I think that that's a bigger issue, but what I like to look at is how can we solve things like the teacher shortage? How can we solve things like the lack of representation in one fell swoop? How can we figure it out? I think that instead of looking at why don't we have a diverse array of teachers, I think we should start asking ourselves, why aren't we preparing students to see themselves as teachers? Why aren't we preparing students to see themselves as members of a community? So that's where my vision for this project came into play. The first thing that I wanted to work on is incremental progress. This is a project that I'm not going to be able to solve in 1 year. This is a project that no one's going to be able to solve in 1 year. So I think that the first thing that I wanted to focus on is the idea of opening up conversations. Making it a realistic way to say, these are the issues that I see, this is what I want to see changed, and get the ball rolling so that something can happen. And then the other idea that I wanted to do was create a base point for other activists to see a movement for multicultural education. Indiana isn't known for multicultural education, so I think creating a project that allows other activists to say, that's what I want to see implemented. I thought that that was a model that I wanted to implement when working with my project. And so I've had various successes, but before I want to talk about my successes, I want to talk about how I created this project. I created it through 3 separate routes. The idea of a local route, a regional route, and a national route. For the local route, what I wanted to focus on is working through the district, diversifying the resources that we have in Ben Davis High School, and diversifying the resources we hold in the district, so that we can create a curricula that is affirming students, like the idea of affirmative education, something that students can see themselves represented in their curricula, but also in their community. And I've had various successes with this. The first success that I had was working with Mrs. Lyle, diversifying the Overdrive online library. I was able to purchase over $1,000 worth of diverse books that are now going to be part of the online curriculum. And I think that's a good way to give access to students while also being technologically competent. But then more so than that, working within Ben Davis High School, I wanted to create classes that are diverse, classes that talk about these issues in real time. As of right now, Ben Davis is the only school in the mid-conference that does not have an ethnic studies class or an equivalent. The only school. And I would say that Ben Davis is one of the most diverse schools in the state, and I think that there's an issue with that. And there comes a point that we as students, we as activists, we need to start saying, this is something that we've noticed, and this is something that needs to be changed. Working with Ms. Squire, we've selected to reincorporate ethnic literature as part of the curriculum for, I think, the 2018 school year. So that was a great success. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I talk about regional successes. But finally, the most successful point, I think, of my project is this document that I have here. It's my board proposal for sustainable diversity in Wayne Township. It's a 55-page report that talks about how we can diversify both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And while it has some things like creating diverse content and things like that, it also has more innovative solutions, I think, which is creating local partnerships with local cultural entities so that we can know about events that are happening in the city and we can become more interconnected. Moving on, I think that another big point of my project is the idea of professional development. I think that we can integrate as many diverse resources as we want, but if teachers are uncomfortable teaching it, then we're not going to see much change. So I think we need to look at the teachers specifically and make sure that they're comfortable teaching the diverse material. So originally, when I started this project, I did some district sessions. The one that I remember best is during election day. I was able to talk to some teachers that were selecting texts for their elementary classes about why diversity matters. And I was able to share the stories that I have through the ESL kids that I work with, and also the story that I have through this project. So the district sessions were very important for me to get the message out originally, but now I'm starting working at Ben Davis High School giving professional development classes. I've given 4 as a pilot session, and I've seen a great amount of success with that. Teachers want to talk about these things. Teachers want to recognize these things, and they want to have these conversations, and they feel like they can't, because every time that they don't understand something, they feel like they're being offensive, or they feel like they are hurting their students. So having classes like professional development that teach them cultural competency is a great way to make sure that teachers feel comfortable teaching these different materials. So moving on into regional, and by regional I mean in the state, the big success that I've had is the document that I have here, which is Senate Bill 337, which is now Public Law 231. It's a bill that I helped work with Senator Taylor, who represents Pike Township in those areas, to create ethnic studies classes as a requirement for all schools in the state. I mean, at first, I was a little hesitant, and I talked to some of my teachers. They told me that that wasn't something that was realistic. You have to look at the state that we're in. That wasn't something that was going to be realistic. But when it went into the House of Representatives, it passed 97-0. So it shows that we have the ability to do something. We just have to tell people what we want. I proposed several other bills through Representative Macer, the representative that we have here. Those didn't fall through, but next year they're going to be re-implemented. The one that I like the most is the one that I was able to write, to create a commission that looks at resources from the Department of Education to make sure that those papers and the standards that we have in the state aren't one-sided. But the end idea that I have is the idea of opening up conversations. A lot of students have a lot of questions. That's what I've found. They want to know about these things, but they don't want to ask because they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to look offensive. They don't want to look whatever you want to add there. So having classes like ethnic studies, like ethnic literature, can allow students to learn in a supportive context, which is what the research shows is very successful for promoting an equitable society. And the last one, which is, for me, the most exciting, is the idea of growth through evidence. So as of late last year, I started working on a research paper to kind of create all the things that I saw in education and kind of put them into one paper. And that's the title that you have here, Personal Approach to Cultural Competency. I've been working through research at IUPUI as well as George Washington University in Washington, D.C. To create this paper, and I'm looking at getting it published in the summer, and how we can create a curricula that engages students personally, and how we can make it that students see themselves reflected in a curriculum, how we can make it that students see themselves reflected in the community, so we have more culturally diverse teachers. We have more innovators in the state that are different, that may not look like us, and we also give students that don't have a diverse background, we can give them a window into what another person's life is like. I come from a family of educators, so for me, the main idea in my household has always been if you have a problem, you solve it through education. So So I think that this is a great way to start looking at connecting the resources that we have here in the state and in the nation as a whole to create an equitable curriculum and create an equitable society in the future. So this project, like I said, isn't going to end with me. I hope to take it with me wherever I go and keep it as something that I was working on and something that has helped me grow a lot as a student. But I want to talk about what we all can do to make sure that we're moving forward as a society. So I have 3 main points, and the first, I think, I would be remiss if I didn't add some political element here. I think that the first thing we need to look at is looking at education as a priority when we look at our elected officials. Whether we're voting in local elections for the state representative, or we're voting in more national elections for president or for Congress, we need to look at education. This can't be something that we focus on every time we do resource adoption or every time we're in school session. This is something that we have to do every day. And we need to focus on the people that are supporting us as students, and then in the future as professionals as well. And then another thing that I want to talk about is supporting education reform, both inside the classroom but outside of it as well. We focus a lot on education being something that happens just inside the classroom, and that's not true. We learn from everything. We learn from our parents, we learn from our families, we learn from the people that surround us, and we need to support an equitable society and education in everything that we do, not just when it comes time to pick out books for the next year. And finally, I think that we need to work towards educating teachers, but then also add educating one another in tolerance and acceptance. Not being afraid to talk about things, not being afraid to let your voice be heard. That's the biggest thing that I've learned through this project. Don't be afraid to talk, because as a student, you have so much power. As a citizen in this country, you have so much power. You have so much ability. You have so much opportunity. So use it to make the lives of those around you a little bit better in the future. And ultimately, the main idea that I've worked through this project is the idea that any step forward is still progress. A lot of times we want to change the world and we want to see the entire world change, but we don't realize that just one book that wasn't there before, that's progress. Just one class that wasn't there before, that's progress. Just one person knowing something about you that they didn't know before, that's progress. By talking today, you're doing something that's going to be progress. And we need to see every small step as a victory. That's what I've learned throughout my project, and that's what I hope to take with me as I move on into the future. So that's a little bit about my project. Here I just have works cited and stuff like that. So I'm open for questions if anyone has any questions.
I'll ask a question.
Sure.
So what will you take away with you next year when you head to Columbia?
I think that this is probably the biggest thing. I'm the type of person that's very perfectionist. I want everything to be done the way that I want to see it done. And I needed a reality check, and someone told me anything that you do that is a step forward is a step forward. And that kind of persistence to try and get as far as you can through those little steps,